Today on Spirit Inspire, we interview KC4WQ. This is KG4WWE. My father on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, John Sohl, and joined with me is my co-host, Vincent Ricketts.
Hello there.
Hey, Vincent. Good to be with you. And today we have a very special guest, my own father, John Allen Sohl Jr., Buddy Sohl for short. So welcome, Dad. Oh, wait. Where is he? Oh, there's a reason. It's a very special episode, so I got to make a call real quick. Hang on. KC4WQ, this is KG4WWE. Where are you?
Hey John, KG4WWE, KC4WQ. I'm stuck in the elevator. Cell phones don't work in this box, but the radio did. So, it's just starting to move. I'll be there in just a minute, I think.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you very, very soon because we're kind of waiting on you to start this episode. So hurry up. KG4WWE.
Yeah, just open on the second floor. I'll be there in just a second. KC4WQ.
Sounds good. All right, we will see him very, very shortly. And there's something to what just happened here. I think it's a very exciting moment for us as we prepare to welcome my dad. Are you ready? I am. Before I even had to call him again.
Sorry.
Welcome. You're fine.
Technology at its finest.
That's right. Actually, it's funny that you decided to do it this way, Dad, to enter. This is my dad, everybody. Welcome. Thanks, Dad, for being on the show.
Well, what can I say? You know, when your son asks you to do something, you tell him no most of the time.
I remember when I was in seventh grade, I believe, at St. Aloysius in Shepherdsville, when I was on the way to school, and you had me go to talk to my principal, which, of course, for a seventh grader is kind of terrifying, right? You never want to have to talk to your principal. And you had me do it in the most unique way. You handed me a radio and said, hand the radio to her and talk to me, because at this point I had my amateur radio license, right? And you made me talk to her through you to introduce her to what radio is, that then brought amateur radio as an after-school program. You know, you remember that?
I do. That's one way to introduce radio into the classroom.
And a lot of good came from that time, you know? And I think that's something that's really, really powerful. And there's so much to that. But before I get into that, I think it's also pretty cool to comment on the fact that Vincent's grandfather, who we've interviewed on this show before, is also an amateur radio operator, right?
That's right.
Do you know his call sign?
Kilo Delta 4, Foxtrot November, Papa.
FNP.
I love that it's Papa at the end, because you always call him Papa Chuck.
Yeah, just never thought about it. Yeah,
that's kind of cool.
He's just feeling no pain.
Feeling no pain. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Huh. And as a lawyer, that's definitely got to be what you got to deal with as well. Because he was the one who actually was the lawyer for the Melignado case, right? Mm-hmm. And that was if you haven't watched that episode, it's pretty interesting. But amateur radio is definitely something that most people have never even heard of, you know, or if they haven't heard of it, or maybe they've heard of it, but they don't really understand what it is, right? I think a lot of people get it confused with like CB radio, children's band. And I think that's a big thing. But today's episode, I think, before we get into amateur radio and everything, gosh, you're my dad, so this is like so fun. First off, you have a T-shirt, because a lot of people might think of amateur radio in this term, right? Does anybody know what this says? Do you know what this is?
What part of da 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 da. Don't you understand?
What is that? Vincent, do you know? You have to
What
know
is
it.
the translation, or what is
No,
that?
what-
That's Morse code. I don't know Morse code.
You just said, you just gave the right answer.
Yeah. What part of Morse code?
Oh, is it the Morse code? Okay, there you go.
It's good. It's good. I actually had to take the license test to also do Morse code back when they still
Yeah, it's
required
still required.
it, right?
Yep.
Which is very cool.
To get your general license.
Yeah, because even, I mean, you think of Titanic when they use Morse code on the ship, right? Or other, famous moments in history like the wars, right? Those are critical parts of how amateur radio's been used.
The story is on the Titanic, it was the first time the SOS was actually used.
Ever.
Because CQD was used for distress before that.
Wow. And that, I think people got the mistake of save our ship because of that, right? SOS.
It will actually save our souls.
Save our souls. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. But thinking of souls, I mean, we are a couple of souls right here. John Sohl, Buddy Sohl, or John Sohl Jr., which is so cool. I'm John Sohl III, if no one knew that. There's kind of a story to all this. I think we'll hit several topics, Dad. I think amateur radio is definitely a center of the story here, and kind of getting into what that is and everything. But kind of before that, like, for our audience's sake, like, maybe give a little backstory, Dad, of your upbringing, what led you to your faith, what led you to amateur radio, what led you to different things in life, what kept you in Louisville, all of that kind of stuff. Want to jump into that?
Wow.
I know it's pretty open-ended. That's pretty much how these episodes are, though.
Let me see. I was born in 57. I was baptized in 57. I went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic high school. And in Catholic high school, they had a class that basically said, hey, all these religions are about the same. And I thought, really? So for years, I just kind of wandered around. And then when I moved back to Louisville, and I haven't stayed in Louisville, I lived in Memphis for a few years. Went to school in Oklahoma. And, those years were kind of interesting because I was learning a lot. And I started my career, I was heading into law enforcement. And was hired by the Louisville Police Department, working my way into a street class, which really actually never happened. So I kind of floundered there for about 5 or 6 years, and I got this job with air traffic control in '82. And it was kind of interesting because I had no idea what I was getting into. So off I go to Oklahoma, I learned something different, and I'd been invited into a class for Kentucky State Police in '83. So I was just going to air traffic just to learn something different, and figured I'd be coming back to be a trooper. And what ended up happening was I found out I was pretty good at air traffic control. The pay was a lot better, and not much chance of somebody taking a shot at me. So it was a grueling 2 years to reach journeyman status. The original course I took was 14 weeks. You were 8 hours in the classroom, and if you didn't study with your group 8 to 10 hours a day after that, you didn't make it through. It was rather intense, and then the FAA decided that was too hard. They had too many failures. Like my class, we had my actual class was a class of 19, of which only 8 of us graduated. I was number 3 in my class with a composite of 76.92%. Yes.
That's like a C.
Yeah, a low C at that.
Oh my gosh.
And I was 3rd in my class. So it was a very intense course, but what they were looking for were people that could take in huge amounts of information and start using it right away and learn on the fly. And it worked. It worked well. It was a good career, and it paid the bills.
So what are like some highlights from air traffic control? And we're talking about the Standiford Tower that everyone sees from miles away.
Well, yeah, that's where I retired from. I originally started as an en route controller, and there's three different kinds of air traffic controllers for the most part. You have guys that do nothing but work in the tower and look out the windows, and then you have, like here at Standiford, you have the tower controllers as well as the radar room downstairs, which handles all the approach around the airport. And at Stanford, you're trained up and down. And then there's the en route controllers, which handle everything else, all the high altitude stuff, all the airspace that's outside of approach controls. And that's what I did in Memphis. Lost a couple airplanes that just disappeared off the scope, and they found them scattered all over Tennessee and Arkansas. Had one that guy was about to die here. That's what he told me. He was icing up, and I was able to get him out of the clouds, and that made my whole career, because he came over the next day, and he just wanted to meet the man that saved his life. So that was out of a 25-year career. That was probably the peak right there.
And you landed on the interstate? Is that what you had to do?
No, that was a different story.
Oh.
No, this one actually got him to the airport, but he had no forward visibility. The airplane had completely iced up. He'd lost his main battery source, the magneto, off the engine. So he was running on a backup battery, barely kept it running, and I basically drove him down Fern Valley Road once he got below the clouds, and walked him all the way to the runway with the help of the controller upstairs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's kind of neat. But then the one that landed on the Waterson was down by Bell's Lane, and he actually ran out of gas in the clouds on an instrument flight plan, which is bad news for him. But yeah, he was screaming for a runway, and I was doing my best to get him on the ground. And he didn't have enough altitude to get to the airport, so he landed on the Waterson at 2:30 in the morning.
So you saved both of them? Basically.
Well, no, he did all the saving there.
Oh, okay.
I just told him what to look for, from what I could recall, having driven that stretch. Because, there's power lines and phone lines and all kinds of stuff going across the interstate. So in towers, of course, and being a ham radio operator, I'm aware of those obstructions that other people just don't even see. And I was able to kind of give him a heads up on kind of what to expect. Of course, he's flying in the dark with no engine, so it's kind of like, what do you do? And it could have turned out really, really bad, but told him to stay on the right-hand side of the road so he'd go with the traffic, and so it all came out good.
Man, oh man. I think of the tower, because being a kid, I remember us going in Cub Scouts, doing tours there on a regular basis, visiting there to see Thunder over Louisville, and then beating all the traffic on the way home.
Yeah, I got a 7-mile head start.
That's what I remember. I remember when you did the Santa track with Reed Yaden on the news for 20 years, and every year. And one year we got to go and meet the guy who was playing Santa. Oh, sorry if anyone had that. Sorry, Vincent. No, but it was a fun thing, and being blown away by how the guy even knew that my room was a mess, right? And not realizing that he was just hiding on the roof until I looked away. And the guy said, "No, look out that window," as I'm looking for the sleigh to fly off. And I was like, "Oh, I missed it." And Jerry, who had already done everything, already was hiding from the kids, which was just such a, I don't know. It's a cherished memory kind of stuff that you just hold on to in some ways, because there was a sense of magic about the job you had, Dad, my whole life. Like, because without that work that you had to deal with for all those years, I wouldn't have had the college education I had. I wouldn't have been able to go to DeSales, and all the Catholic education that I had. That job gave you the security to even pay for us to go to school.
It made things fairly easy. Plus your mother could actually be a full-time mom.
Right.
We didn't have to struggle and try to put together 2 incomes.
Right. And that's an incredible sacrifice, and that's a gift to me, and it makes me even be able to do what I'm doing right now, which is so cool. And I looked at the tower one time driving around, because you can't miss it. Every time you get on 65, you're going to see it if you drive that stretch. And I thought to myself, there's skyscrapers downtown everywhere, and they're right next to each other. You can't get away from them. A lot of people hate the city for that reason. Of course, we're here at the cathedral right in the middle of all those skyscrapers. But that's a skyscraper on some level.
Kind of.
And it's by itself. So it looks taller than maybe it is compared to other buildings.
And it's 247 feet from the ground to the floor of the cab.
Wow.
And there's 427 steps.
I know, I've walked them before. But I think of that as like significant. It's almost like if the city is like Jerusalem, the outskirts of Jerusalem is the cross. And so the sacrifice you made every day was like that lone cross by itself on that way. Like, and you're in the dark, you're alone, it's dark in the night. I mean, there's something to that. And it's like I think it's called the #1 most stressful job in the entire country.
No, it's supposed to be in the top 5.
Top 5.
But it's just, they give you a quarter when you start to play a video game. But they only give you 1 quarter and you can never lose. That's about what the job is.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't lose a life.
Nope.
You can't do that at all.
No, because if you can make a mistake and cause some serious damage. Now, granted, there's all kinds of backups. Controllers aren't going to run airplanes into each other, even if they screw up. There's enough equipment on the airplanes that, for the most part, they're not going to run into each other. There might be some spilled drinks, some people falling over if airplanes have to make radical maneuvers. But it's a really good system. It's a safe system.
Yeah.
There's so much redundancy and so many different requirements for separation. And the one thing you'll see a lot of time on the news, well, you had a near miss here at such and such a place. It's not, no. A near miss for them is anything less than standard separation. And at altitude, standard separation is 5 miles or greater.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that's not, near miss, people are thinking like that kind of
Right,
thing,
exactly.
and that's not it at all.
No.
Okay.
Have those happened? Sure they have. You know, it's a big sky up there, but there's roadways in the sky, and so a lot of people are flying these same roadways. Man. And
but you're essentially responsible for thousands of people's lives every single moment while you're working an 8-hour shift.
Well, I was dealing with UPS for a lot, so I was dealing with a lot of packages.
Oh.
But yeah, that's probably, if there's anything that's going to stress out a controller, it's worrying about that. But you just have to understand that you know the job and you know the requirements, and you don't take chances, and you put people where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, and do it to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And there's no preferential treatment. It's basically who's going to be first at the airport, they go first. Who's going to be second, they go second. You know, every once in a while you can jockey them around a little bit because of the differences in sizes of airplanes. You can put like a bigger airplane behind a smaller airplane, and there's less chance of turbulence behind. But if you have like, in all the standards, they've actually been modified since I retired. It used to be, it was basically 3, 4, 5, or 6 miles. And now it's 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles, but all the types of different. And
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy, some of the things that you look at when you're trying to figure out what airplanes are doing.
And seeing the radar, which is a 2-dimensional thing, and how it's 3-dimensional in reality, and you have to be able to see those in your mind on some level, because it's not the same. It's not like you're actually playing a video game and watching the planes fly above each other.
Right.
It's a different
It's a
situation.
2-dimensional world that you're thinking in 3-dimensionally. But then again, you have all the visual representation because all the aircraft are reporting altitudes to you. So all that's displayed. So you're just kind of looking. And the big thing is, just think about this. You got 10 people that show up 50 miles away from your house, and they're saying, hey, we're on the way. And you have to look at them and say, okay, how fast is this one driving? How fast is that one driving? How fast is that one driving? What roads are they going to have to take? Where am I going to have to turn them? Well, if I give this one a chance, I can cut him in a little quicker. He's a little faster.
Right, because there's no pavement.
And right.
There's no road sign, street sign. You have none of that except what's in their own vehicle. That's
And it's the same thing with airplanes. If you tried to run everybody down roads all the time, you would waste huge amounts of gas. So if it's slow, you can cut corners sometimes.
Gosh.
And you coordinate with the guys and gals that are sitting next to you. Say, hey, I want to get this guy in next. Okay, do it. You dump him down, turn him inside.
Yeah. I think of the 2-dimensional leading to 3-dimensional, like that whole, you got to be able to see that and be able to move them through that world. Similar, in like going back to SOS, save our souls. Like you're saving lives, and then there's saving souls. And on the spiritual side, like we have a 3-dimensional world, and how many people think this is all there is? and yet you're trying to guide them to say, actually, you aren't going to live forever. Time is that fourth dimension, and you're trying to guide people through that space, and that can be stressful as well. So I'm thinking, like, everything you did in your career, Dad, in with the eyes of faith is like you're dealing with air traffic control. If that's not the Holy Spirit, on some level, that intangible, impossible to see kind of concept that a lot of people understand as simply faith, I don't know what is. Like, I just think that's such a cool parallel to see the connection between those two realities. Now, not everybody sees that. I wonder what Vincent has to say about that, or because I don't know if I've ever made that connection with you, because it's always been something that actually I've now always thought about it. I've not always realized it. It's something that I've thought about only in the last couple of years, in that connection. So, no.
Just sounds like something you'd say. I don't know.
Right. Well, I think that's a big job, Dad, and I'm blown away that you were able to do it for 20 years, or no, 25 years, right? Yeah. And that the timing even of your retirement let you do baseball with us, for all these years. That's really cool. But that's another topic. We'll get to that. But I wanted to get into amateur radio a little bit at this point, and then get into my confirmation saint as well, and how that there's a connection between St. Maximilian Kolbe and amateur radio. But first, like, what is amateur radio, and how did that interest you at that time in your life? Because it was right around the same time you started this career in air traffic control, right?
It was, well, I got into radio prior to that.
Right before?
Years prior. Yeah. Back in the 70s, there was a show, that movie that came out called Smokey and the Bandit. And it generated this CB craze. Everybody was putting CB radio in the car. Well, I'd known about radio because my great uncle was W4KBR. And he had tried for probably decades to get somebody else in the family involved in radio. But he always talked to his sons, his nephews, but he never crossed that generation. He never went below that generation. And Charlie died in 76. And I got involved in radio in 78.
Wow.
So
it was almost like he had something to do with that a little bit.
Yeah, almost. I met some people around the neighborhood, and we found a ham radio class and got involved in radio, and just kind of became enamored with it. It opens doors for you that will quite often remain closed. I did a show on the local Catholic radio station here, WLCR, for about 10 years. And one of the other shows I did was one of the talk shows. I had the kids that I was teaching at St. Aloysius come in, and it was just a roundtable thing. And we were discussing amateur radio in the classroom and what you can expect, what they were getting out of it, etc. And I had a guest caller call in. And I'd sent him an email and thought, he might be able to call in, spend a couple minutes with us. Because the class that I started out at St. Aloysius was the first big project school in the state of Kentucky. And what the big project is a program by the American Radio Relay League, which is kind of the spokesperson for amateur radio in the U.S. And a lot of people donate to this program to get amateur radio into the classroom, for teachers to learn that, for students to learn that. And one of the big supporters of that is this guy that plays guitar by the name of Joe Walsh.
Huh.
And Joe actually called in
of the Eagles.
Of the Eagles.
Right.
And the James Gang. But Joe called in, and I figured, he'd be able to spend a few minutes with us. Well, he spent the whole hour with us. And all I had to do was sit back and listen. So he told his story about the fame of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and all the things that came along with that. And how amateur radio always kept him grounded, that when he could just get on the air and just be Joe, he could walk into a place with ham radio operators, and he was just Joe. He wasn't some super mega star. He was just an average guy. And there's a lot of hidden hams out there. King Hussein of Jordan was a ham. Barry Goldwater, senator from Arizona for decades,
Wow.
was K7UGA. His station out in just outside of Phoenix, I believe it was. They ran tons of phone patches for the guys in Vietnam back in the 60s. And so the guys were able to talk to their family stateside through amateur radio.
Without necessarily being able to be tracked or detected?
No,
Or-
well, it was all done from what are called MARS stations, military amateur radio support or service.
So it gave them some kind of security, I guess, or...
Well, no, it was just over the air.
Oh,
It's like you get on shortwave radio and you can listen to people all over the world. But they were able, because of the proximity of Arizona to there was always some good propagation into that part of the world. So these guys could actually talk back to their family through radio. And that's a one-way thing. They talk, and then you say over, and then you listen. And then when the other person's finished talking, they say over, and you have a ham that's in the middle that's actually pushing a transmit switch or letting it go.
yeah, because you can't just get on the radio and start talking. You actually have to have an
always
official
fun.
license.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, it is a licensed service. And you asked originally what amateur radio was.
Yeah.
By definition, it is a licensed service by the U.S. government to provide a pool of trained communications experts and electronics experts.
Huh.
That's the first question on the test.
Right.
So, and the whole idea is for people to get involved in this. And if the time were come that amateur communications is needed, then amateur radio steps up. The 96 tornado in Bullitt County, hams in the metro area provided somewhere around 3,000 or 4,000 man hours in the first 2 weeks, providing communications for the fire departments and the police departments and the Red Cross.
And even today, because that was before the internet exploded like it has, so a lot of people's, I think, perception is, the internet's solid, it's stable, cell phones are great. But if a natural disaster happened on that kind of level, all that still goes down today.
Cell phones don't work, and if you don't have the infrastructure behind cell phones, it's just a nice toy to play Scrabble on, maybe. And I can communicate with you through Bluetooth in the same room, but that's the extent of it. And as you saw with these little HTs, these particular radios cover 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Look it up on the internet. And,
right, there's going to be a lot of jargon from amateur radio that you might not understand, everybody. So
these
keep that in
things are
mind.
great. These things are great for local communications. You have other radios that are great for international communications, regional communications, and a lot of it depends on the frequencies you want to operate, where you need to talk, who you need to talk to, how you want to talk. Yes, this is not a joke. We still use Morse code every day. There are thousands of ham operators around the world that do nothing but Morse code because that's what they enjoy. There's a local ham here, WD4LCC. Y'all might know him as Larnell Harris.
Larnell Harris.
Yeah, gospel singer. I know him as Stu. And Stu is a great CW op, and his philosophy was the same as Walsh's. This allows me to just be Stu.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys like that just get on there to enjoy each other, have good conversation
Right.
and all of that. But there's also all kinds of ways people can use radio for other types of recreation, like contesting and whatnot, like that. Like you do every year, amateur radio field day, which is a national thing, right?
It's North America for the most part, but a lot of Europeans have been getting involved in the stateside field day lately.
Yeah, field day, you basically have to set up a 1 or 2 or 3 or however much you can afford, I guess, of antennas in a field at a place that you rent for the day or are able to use, and then spend 24 hours a day just making contacts with people all over the country that are participating in field day and keeping track of how many contacts you make, and each one is a certain amount of points. And then at the end, you have however many contacts and however many points you made of what those contacts are worth, I guess. And do people win an award? I mean, what do you get?
Not really. It's a contest. It's not a contest.
It's more to raise awareness about amateur radio.
Yes,
I feel.
Field Day is sold as the largest emergency communications exercise in the world, and it is. And you actually do. You take HF radios, high frequency radios that are capable of worldwide communications, and you set them up in a field. You can run on generators, you can run on solar power, on battery backups, you can run off commercial mains. There's a lot of different categories that you fit in, and you can be a club, you can be an individual, you can just be a couple of friends that are out setting up. And the whole purpose of it is to show that amateur radio is a viable source to be able to communicate when all else fails. Mm-hmm. And cell phones are great, and they'll be there for forever and ever. But if the infrastructure behind them fails, if a tornado comes through and tears all the towers down, or tears several of the towers down. I just remember when Katrina hit New Orleans so bad. The governor and the mayor of New Orleans were on the podium, and of course you got all the news people there with their satellite stuff, and so you're getting these live feeds, and they asked some of the people from the cell phone companies how long it would be before they could have their infrastructure back up, and they said 2 to 3 weeks, and we should be okay. And there were 2 old boys standing behind them in bib overalls, and they asked, "How long till you guys are ready?" And he said, "We've been ready since you got here. What do you need?" And they were the ham operators. So they were able to communicate outside of New Orleans and provide health and welfare traffic and other types of things. What do we need? I can communicate from New Orleans to Kentucky, and it may be that they just need to tell somebody in Louisville, say, "Hey, these people are fine." A lot of the health and welfare traffic is what goes over amateur radio.
I think of the significance of that because of the horrific experiences of emergency situations where people are literally, their lives are on the line. I mean, being able to communicate is a matter of life and death in those types of situations, and there's some level of, to me, significance of how. I mean, again, I always do the parallels between this incredible, not just a hobby. I mean, to me, it's like it's like one of the most vital hobbies that anybody could have. Like, you have to have people who have this hobby. It's not like if you didn't have stamp collectors, it'd probably be okay, right? But today in the communication era, like, there's something to this that it's like it's a very critical component for stabilization after a traumatic event like that. And then I think of there's a quote from Pope Francis. I don't know, early in his pontificate, he said something like, "The church is a field hospital, not a museum," right? So it's like thinking of field hospital in the middle of a war zone, all of that. And so when we were at World Youth Day, I saw a huge field of confessionals, just priests hearing confessions like constantly. And I've never connected the dots between, this largest emergency communications exercise in the world on that kind of level, thinking of what people use with this for anything but emergencies, anything but healthy and good, right? The kind of communication people use with this thing can actually be detrimental to their health, to their well-being, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And the kind of communication you all do is maybe simple and seemingly unimportant to some people, but like, what's the purpose of communication but to make sure that there's safety and stability as well? Like, this is good, but if this is causing you like to not know how to communicate, it's actually doing you a disservice. I feel like amateur radio is supposed to be an actual service to the people. That's
why it's called an amateur radio service.
Oh,
well, and it's international. It's you have to realize that radio waves don't respect boundaries, so that when you transmit, that radio wave just goes forever. It gets weaker and weaker and weaker. It's kind of like throwing a rock into a creek. You got your initial splash, and then it gets a little less, but that splash is always there. Radio waves are the same way, and some of them will hit the ionosphere and bend back to Earth. so you can communicate beyond the horizon. Others don't. Amateur radio has satellites that are flying around that hams have built and piggybacked on rockets. The International Space Station has an active amateur radio station, and not all, but almost all of the people that go to the space station are licensed in their country. And,
Wow.
so you can actually talk to the astronauts as they fly over occasionally.
Have you gotten to do that?
I have not.
Not yet.
No, I've heard them. There was a school down in Bardstown that had a schedule. And schools can do that. They can arrange a schedule with the space station. They have to realize that you're only going to talk to the space station when they come above the horizon. And once they go on the other side of the horizon, I don't care how much power, what kind of antennas, you're not talking to them. They're gone until they come back around the Earth again.
Wow.
So whatever their footprint is, what they can geographically see outside their window, they can communicate with. And I do have a YouTube channel that I recorded this transmission from the space station. One of the astronauts was talking, and the kids would actually pose questions to the astronaut, and then the astronaut would answer them. Now, I edited out all the parts about the kids because I had no idea what frequency they were on,
Oh, right.
and that's done to keep possible interference or somebody else jumping on that frequency. Because some people are just dumb and they like to mess up other people's fun.
Yeah, that's a true thing.
But you mentioned some of the things that amateur radio has accomplished in the classroom. As I had one girl that when she showed up in my classroom, she couldn't put two words together without stuttering. I don't know if it was some kind of trauma from home, because stutterers sometimes. My dad was a stutterer, and his dad yelled constantly. So and that may have been an issue there.
I remember this
Yeah.
girl. Yeah,
But
she was definitely.
She really could not talk, and now she routinely talks in front of the legislature here in Frankfurt.
What?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
She
What?
does.
Oh my gosh. I just remember being at mass and hearing her like burst out and like, what is going on? This girl's like
And then
got some issues, but man, praise God.
Another girl in the class came in, and she was a little chubby thing in the 4th grade, real quiet. Ended up with a full ride at MIT in a field that she'd never even thought of until she got exposed to amateur radio.
Now she lives in New York and works
Raises
with horses.
Raises horses, yeah. It's but a lot of really good things came out of that. Twice a year they do a thing called School Club Roundup. So any school that has a club, and it doesn't have to be a constant operating club. You could actually get with a local ham and say, hey, I want to put my kids on the air this week. And they'll bring the station in, set it up, put the kids on the air. And when you have someone that's operating that's not licensed, it's called third-party traffic. So I could let you operate. I could let you operate. You've got a license.
That's right.
And
I got my hat.
But I could let you operate on frequencies you don't have privileges to yet.
That's true. I'm not an amateur extra,
Right.
but I am a general, which
That's
is
true. It's a
one step below, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But with School Club Roundup, the kids get on the air and they talk to people all over the country, sometimes all over the world. And this one young lady, she's knocking them out right and left. She's a pretty good contester. And the idea of a contest is you have an exchange. You pass information to them, they pass information back to you. So it's quick, and the idea is to get the information passed correctly and quickly and efficiently.
And it's basically like, what region are you in the country, state, and as well as how strong is your equipment, or rather, how strong is your signal. And if you're contesting like at field day, then what kind of equipment do you all use, right?
How many transmitters set? In the School Club,
there's different codes for that.
School Club Roundup, you're basically giving them a signal report and where are they at, and the station answer, what you call CQ, which there's a lot of abbreviations used in amateur radio, and they all come from Morse code, because you could send a Q signal 3 letters that meant a whole sentence. Like QTH is location. If you add QTH with a question mark, it's what is your location? So it didn't matter the language the other person was speaking. All the Q codes were the same around the world. And
it's like Latin. It's like
kind of.
the universal language of amateur radio is Morse code.
She had this station caller, and I told her, I said, here, let me talk to this guy. So I went in and gave him the exchange and thank you very much. And she said, did I do something wrong? And I said, no, but he's in Portugal. And she goes, oh, we don't have a third-party agreement with them, do we? So, I mean, she was right there on
And
the
she
top of
knew
it.
that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then she went, wait a minute, that's in Europe. So she got all excited, and so now and she's written 2 books now. She's a little sci-fi author.
It's amazing.
So a lot of good things. Had a 9-year-old on the air that was talking to Ham in Washington State. The Ham in Washington State was 90 when this child was born. He was 99.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Cool. I think of amateur radio as like part of my own origin story and just growing up and everything. I mean, I literally, you got me my license when I was 12 years old, and even though I haven't practiced and I'm not on the air regularly, I still come to field day every year and spend some time making contacts, which is a lot of fun. And my brother Matt, you know, we both have our licenses, and that's awesome. You finally got Mom to get her license, so almost the whole family has it, which is exciting. But
it's great during deer season too, because take our radios with us.
Because when you're out in the middle of nowhere, sometimes your phone does not work, so this does, and that's pretty awesome.
On our farm, the phone works a lot less than it does.
Yes, that's very true. But and it used to be years ago that it didn't work at all, and there's still lots of places where the phones don't work. Like if you go down into the Kentucky Holy Lands, which is around the area where our farm is located, you don't have service at all. Like it's pretty remote. So this is where this kind of stuff is pretty handy. But I think it's particularly cool because of how amateur radio became even more meaningful to me as I got older, even if I'm not involved in it directly all the time, knowing that you always keep me grounded in this sense of this connection to it is my confirmation saint, who we could have never known at the time. Like when I did my confirmation, I mean, did you know this?
Yeah, I knew that.
You knew it? I never knew that. Maybe okay.
Yeah, Maximilian Colby was SP3RN.
Yes, he's the only licensed amateur radio operator who is also a Catholic saint, which is kind of amazing.
You're not.
Yeah, only one. And that means, I mean, this man was like ahead of his time in many ways of what he saw the world could be. And if he had lived, he could have lived until literally the 1980s. Even as he could, if he had lived to be 100, he would have lived to be until 1994. And so he was obviously cut short in Auschwitz by being murdered by the Nazis. Martyred, really, sacrificing his life for a prisoner. But obviously that story is heroic and powerful, and that I think inspired so many people that led to his canonization, where the guy he even sacrificed his life for was there. I mean, you want to talk about propagation. There's the gospel propagated and decades later. But I think of what he was doing during his life. Like, he started an international magazine. He traveled to Japan to start a community there. He was starting his own community called Nepocolano, which is the City of the Immaculate, or City of Mary. And he had a fire station, obviously a chapel, and, you know, living spaces for the brothers, but, you know, a printing press and a radio station, an area where he actually, and I've been to Nepocolano. I went there in 2016 for World Youth Day, and so I got to see all these places, and I was just amazed that he had that a license. Like, it's such a cool thing. So when you look up his call sign today, SP3RN, it's actually owned and operated by a community of amateur radio operators, I think, in Poland, who are honoring him and his name and his legacy, which is so cool. Because part of me, the reason I looked it up, I was like, I wonder if I can change my call sign to his, and if anyone's figured that out yet. Obviously, they had figured that out, right?
And obviously, since you have a U.S. call sign, no, you could not have.
Right, no, I could not have, so that's all right.
That's another question on the test.
Right, you can't just have any call sign, right? It's not like a license plate in that sense. It's a very different thing. But I just think there's something powerful about all of the connections.
Well, and that was actually one thing that brought Colby's attention back to the Nazis, was his radio station, because he was actually doing some broadcasting on the side that was some anti-Nazi stuff. And he would move it around. It wasn't where he was just he was very covert in his operations, but that was the thing about and kind of troubling about some of the times we have today is that neighbors were ratting people out to the powers that be, and that's how totalitarian governments work.
Yes, because I think of back then as, I mean, you had to be covert, but like today, people will post something like, you've got to be careful what you post and how you post it to some extent today, because of how people act and how they can put you in the news, right? Like, but yet you can operate with that kind of fear, or rather, like Colby did, covertly, tactfully, right, intentionally. Like if he had to move it around, it's because he knew that, okay, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it in a way that stays undetected under the radar. And that way he could continue doing it. And even I think he had an opportunity to go to the United States and to leave Poland forever. And he said, no, I'm staying. And he was arrested probably within a month or less of that time. But he knew that he had to stay for the sake of the people that he was serving. And
it's kind of like John Paul didn't leave either.
Right.
What did he do? He knew they were trying to wipe out their history, so he just memorized everything.
Yes.
And then wrote it all down after the war.
Yes. Memorizing plays and poetry and all of the Polish culture they were trying to completely erase, and the future John Paul II just held it in. And I'm sure he trained other people to do a similar thing, right? Like the things that they had to do during that time are just intense. And so I think this is important in maybe a prophetic way, like thinking of amateur radio. Because the last time, Dad, you ever had me do this, a very, very wonderful family entered our life. And that was, Susan Gendron and her daughter, right? And Susan is the one who handed Mom the right book that I got to learn about the theology of the body, and it led me into a lot of things that really helped me get through, difficult times in my life. And now Susan's a co-founder of Family Renewal Project, which is where I work, right? So I look at that as like a tiny little moment of like, you just had me do this on this show with all these people that might be watching it one day. What's getting ready to happen in our lives, right? I have no idea, but something significant to me. But yet, at the same time, will we face persecution in the church in the coming years? And what kinds of ways will we have to learn to communicate? And amateur radio might be one of those ways that we might have to learn if it's not safe to use this anymore, right? And more, do you always feel completely safe using this? Or do you feel like one day the particular powers that have the ability to control what we do and what we post, will we be controlled in that way? Not to be afraid, but just to be aware, right? I think it's important.
Well, we have that one thing in amateur radio that has attracted are preppers, people that are preparing for the end of the world or for an SHTF situation.
Yes, it's not necessarily
and
a good crowd to want to attract either all the time.
Most of them are.
Right.
Most of them are pretty stolid people, and they're more interested in just being able to communicate. And a lot of them don't understand that you can't just pick up a little radio and talk to your family on the other side of the world or the other side of the country. That these things, they have their limitations, but there are radios that are capable of that. And yes, you should learn how this stuff works. If nothing else, just to have additional knowledge. When I left the Louisville Police Department and went to air traffic control, I really wasn't. The goal was not to be a controller. It was because I was looking at making a move to the Kentucky State Police, and this was something that I actually, believe it or not, I was dared to take the test. The guy that I worked with, he said, you're a geek, you do this radio stuff, and said, you ought to take this test. I went, okay, I didn't know what I was getting into. Next thing I know, they hired me. And I made a career out of it, but that's neither here nor there. But just learning something for the sake of learning it, like learning a different language. Americans are language poor. Most Americans know one language, and depending on the part of the country, it's either English or hillbilly.
Right.
But and most Americans don't really know English very well. So when they do try to learn a different language, it's a lot more difficult because they never learn their first language correctly.
Yeah.
But there's so many things, just to learn it. What John Paul spoke, some like 7 or 8 languages fluently.
And then an additional like 5 or 6
that he could understand
pretty well.
Yeah.
Right.
So the more you use your brain, I think the better off you're going to be. And don't waste your time playing all the games. If you're going to pick up a phone and you're going to stare at it 6 or 8 hours a day, don't be playing solitaire, because you're not going to win any money first off.
Right.
But you do something like maybe Duolingo, where you're learning a different language, or Duolingo even teaches music.
Right.
There's a lot of different things. There's a lot of educational formats out there that, if you're sitting there watching, one thing as an air traffic controller, to jump back there a minute, the one thing they taught me how to do very well was multitask. When your mother and I got married, it drove her crazy, because a controller is capable, a controller that is active, that's been doing this for years, we develop the ability to hear everything going on around you and to be able to participate in multiple conversations at the same time, because that's what we did all day. You're talking to the guy next to you, you're talking to people that are upstairs, you can push the button, you're talking to somebody in Indianapolis or Cincinnati or Lexington, and it's all instantaneous, and you've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 ideas all running through your head at the same time, and you're putting all this together, and you're throwing it back and forth. It just rolls over into social situations. So we were with a group of people, and I'm talking to 4 or 5 people at the same time. Drove Tina crazy. She said, "How do you do that?" I said, "I don't know. I just do."
Yes. And there's times where you're talking to somebody else and we're talking to you and we think you don't hear us, but you heard us, and then you respond to us and we're like, oh. And that, yeah, I remember that. And it's so funny, like I heard the story of John Paul II, even as we, keep going back to him. He could actually, not only did he know all these languages, but somebody could be, he could be reading a dense text of theology while someone is reading to him out loud a dense text of philosophy, and he's absorbing both at the same time while learning another language at the same time that someone else is like sitting with him too. And I'm like, how can you even do that? That's an incredible gift, right? And obviously it depends on what you gravitate toward, what you're best at, and what you enjoy most.
In amateur radio, the people that have always amazed me are those that can send Morse code while they're talking to you.
Yes.
I cannot do that.
Yeah, right, exactly. There's a limitation.
I can copy code. I can hear code coming, and I can figure out what's being said.
How many words per minute can you copy on a piece of paper when someone's sending you Morse code?
30 to 35.
And how many words do people speak usually per minute if it's continuous?
150.
So are there people who can go that fast?
Yes and no. There was
because that just to me would sound like just one tone. I mean,
there's a kid recently in Europe that was just sending 5 letter code groups, and when they would send it, just sound like bleh. That's all I heard. It was bleh. But it was 5 letters in there, and he would type them down.
Wow.
And it was at 220 words a minute.
That's got to be very fine tuned.
Oh yeah.
But it's so cool.
It's kind of like some computer coders. Most computer coders are going to be very slow and meticulous. Some people can just fly through it.
Yeah.
But because their brain works like the machine that they're working on has been programmed.
Mm-hmm. And that's not always a good thing, right? When you become like the machine you work on. Yeah, but I don't know. I think there's something to the story that we're kind of telling here. Like amateur radio has like been a big part of our family and your life for all these years, Dad, and the importance of it for the community, especially during tragedies. But and the connection to St. Maximilian Kolbe, right? I think that's just such a cool concept. But there was also like connection, and I made this connection a few years ago because you would always use the word propagation, and as I've got wasn't playing with the radio all the time. I don't always remember what everything means, but I did remember what that meant. As we talked about, how well does the signal get from your radio and the antenna all the way to someone else's, all the way across the world? And that's what propagation is. And I thought, wow, that sounds just like how well can you transmit or articulate or share the gospel with somebody else to actually reach. Oh yeah, Dad has multiple shirts on, so this is kind of the next. Oh, took the wrong one off. That's so funny. So we move on from amateur radio. This is kind of the next phase here. Before we get to the Chicago Cubs, as you might see here on this shirt, we have to do this one. If at first you don't succeed, call Dad. It's pretty awesome. This is kind of like, I think, an important part. Because the sharing of the gospel is hard to do. Like, getting people to really believe in Jesus, live the faith, like, especially when you're told all religions are the same at a Catholic high school. Like, I remember those classes myself, and there are still classes in our schools today that do this. And all religions are the same in one sense, where they're all asking the same questions. Who is God? Is there a God? What does it mean to be human? Where did I come from? Where am I heading? What is the meaning of life? But all religions answer those questions very, very differently in irreconcilable ways, right? And that's the critical component that I think we have to really understand if you even want to talk to people who have a different faith, different religion, so that you actually do have a goal to dialogue with them, but to a point where you're longing to actually invite them to know the deeper sense of truth, the fullness of truth, which is what the Catholic Church is, right? So to me, like, the sharing of the gospel is very, very difficult if you're just going to think you're going to stand on a street corner and pontificate. Now, if you're a Dominican, I guess you can stand in Shakespeare's Park and read the Gospel of Matthew and somebody will convert. Like, I heard of that one guy, I think Brian told us about, who did he come to Louisville Catholic Men? I can't remember who it was.
Father Bartholomew.
Yeah.
Out of St. Louis Persian.
Yeah, he just read the gospel. Like, okay, that's very, very uncommon. Don't think I'm going to go out there and read. I mean, I guess it's possible. But
well, I'd say his habit probably.
His habit would have done something,
yes,
right?
That's the attraction right there. It's not just some guy that lives under the overpass that's standing out there with his tin cup reading the gospel.
Right.
They look at this guy going, why is he doing that? Like, we had one of the new priests at Mass the other day. And it was really great because he went to Flannery O'Connor and he said, Flannery O'Connor said, if this is just a symbol, to hell with it, talking about the Eucharist.
Right.
And he said, the reason I take that to heart is that I'm a young man. I'm in my 20s. Why would I give up a wife, a family for a symbol? I would not do that. But I will give up my life to bring the body and blood of Christ to you.
Yes.
And that's what we've been missing since. I mean, I started grade school around Vatican II, 63.
Bad timing.
Real terrible timing, because we would go to Mass, and I'm trying to remember if we still went to weekly Mass toward the end of my years at the Holy Family. I don't think we did, but I remember at least the first couple of years. If it wasn't weekly Mass, it was daily Mass. And if you were a boy in the third grade, you weren't asked to serve, you were told when to be there. You were on a schedule.
That's awesome.
And their training was maybe not the greatest. Because
so you got trained as an altar server?
Yeah, I always rang the bells at the wrong time. I was terrible. But yeah, it was expected of you, and your parents knew that as well. And then somewhere along the way, all that was, my mother, his grandmother, was a teacher in the diocesan schools for 40 years, I guess.
Yeah.
And she said basically what happened was everything that they had been teaching, with all the new stuff came in, so we don't know what to do, just do something. And that's kind of the guidance they initially got. So there was a lot of stuff. We went from very reverent music to quasi-country rock and roll, and everybody's going, wow. And a lot of people are going, wow, this is really great. And I'm thinking, wow, this is like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah.
It's
Well, back in the 90s when he was a wee tyke,
yes.
his mother was involved in a group called Hand to Hand. And Hand to Hand started.
I love that you went there because I was going to go there.
Right before the big fire that burned down St. Luke's back in '97. So they would get together, and they were playing all over the region, and they were very, very good. It was Christian contemporary music. It was all original stuff, and they were very welcomed in every place but Catholic churches, because Catholics just didn't do that kind of stuff. And they were welcomed in all the non-Catholic churches, except for a few. When they found out they were Catholic, they were no longer welcome, because they couldn't figure out how these non-Christians were singing Christian music. And as their sound guy, slant roadie, slant manager, slant whatever they wanted to call me, I was basically the guy that drove all the stuff around. And I was aware of some of these little snide comments that were made, and I thought, wow, I knew what bigotry was, because I lived in Mississippi for a few years, but I really didn't expect to see that alive and well today in this kind of setting. But sure enough.
Well, I remember Mom had a book when I was a kid at one point, and I can't remember who wrote it, and I would love to find the book again, but it was called Anti-Catholicism, The Last Acceptable Prejudice.
Yep.
And there's something true to that you faced. But the music, I always remember you always said the music is in the message. Or, no, I'm sorry, the message is in the music, right? Right. Because it's not about preaching in the sense that doesn't communicate well, right? You don't want to be the angry preacher guy with a Bible, right? Fire and brimstone. You don't want to be the overly emotional person that gets way too caught up in the high. But it's really just, it was a simple thing. You played music and you inspired people. I absorbed that. I loved band practice as a kid and all the shows that we did. That was so fun. And on some level that communicated better for many people.
Well, it does. Music always communicates better. Because they say music calms the savage beast, and I've watched animals that were just out there in the field running around, and music starts, and something about the music even attracts the animals. Horses will come up to the fence and watch the music. It's strange. It's I don't know what the reaction is, but people are the same way, and a lot of the music that's propagated today. There's that word again. Propagated.
Yeah.
Is angry music. It's very base. It's got negative It's got negative wording.
If anything, it makes the savage beast worse.
Right. It does.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that's a problem with our society, is that people counter that. You listen to the music from the late 50s through the middle 60s. It was all beautiful music. They were all love songs. That's all it was.
And then something happened in the early to mid 60s with some bands and certain things.
It was late 70s, late 70s, 80s,
Yeah.
90s. There started to be a slide one way or the other. And you started talking about things that weren't necessarily beautiful and loving and et cetera. And then the bass boom, 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 boom down here that will break windows in cars if you crank it up too loud. It's there's a lot to be said about beautiful music just being nice to listen to.
Yeah.
Like somebody said, well, at least rap music will never be elevator music. I'm saying, well, if it ever is, there'll probably be shootings in elevators.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a intense thing to think about. Music is I think it's such an important element to really think about, because without good music, the song that you're playing is unlistenable. You don't even want to listen to it. You could have great lyrics, but if the music is just jarring or empty or agitating, it's not going to work.
There was a period in rock and roll that, your mom commented on that. She said, I love that song, but I really never knew what the lyrics were. Because they were doing karaoke. I don't sing. They were doing karaoke with.
You've sang before. I've heard you a few times.
All two. But two older granddaughters were out, and they were doing karaoke. And your mom commented, and I didn't realize those were those words in that song. But it was a song that was very popular in the 60s and 70s, and when she probably sang a couple hundred times and just got the words wrong.
Yeah.
But that one TV show about Don't Forget the Lyrics or something, it's a hilarious show.
Yeah.
Because people don't, they think they know the lyrics and
they don't. Right. And that's sometimes the danger. Like sometimes the lyrics you actually do know, but yet because it's good music, you're drawn into it and you think that's good or healthy, and
the lyrics aren't so great,
right? And then that kind of music, because of bad lyrics, could lead you to other songs that have those types of lyrics that get progressively worse and worse and worse. So I think it's the same like with the gospel. Like you can share the gospel, but if you got bad music, it's horrible. Like nobody wants to hear it. And by that, I mean like if you're judgmental, angry, negative, fear-mongering, that kind of thing, it's not going to work with people. Suppression or guilt shaming, that kind of stuff. But then there's the other side, whereas people will guide people with, oh, this is the truth when it's not good. And they do it in an attractive way. Right? So the goal is to expose what's actually ugly and then help people see the beauty of the faith, the church, but do so in a way that's attractive and inspiring. And then when they get there, it continues to get better. It doesn't mean they're not going to go through hardships and challenges, right? The cross is ugly, right? But it's not because of Jesus. It's because of sin, that you have to get through that. And I think there's something really powerful to think about that. Vincent, you've been kind of quiet over there. You got any thoughts rumbling around? I know it usually takes you a little bit to really...
There's always thoughts rumbling around. Pertaining to this, some less formed. I had some thoughts from the conversation earlier, but we moved on.
Well, you can certainly jump in. I mean, however you...
Well, so remind me because I will get off track. But music has played a really important role in my own, faith journey, if you will. I was not really exposed to beautiful music for a long time. I grew up and listened to everything everybody else is listening to, all the crap that's on the, top 40 pop station and all of that. And then one of the key distinguishers between a liturgy that is well done and respectful and reverent, and a liturgy that has that does not express reverence for the Lord, is in your music.
Mm-hmm.
Are you? I mean, some of the songs that I grew up with, in church, or now I'm looking at the lyrics and I'm like, at best, this is I would say there's an overemphasis on us, me, this all about me, and
overemphasis on community.
Any reference,
Christ.
And any reference to God is so that I can sort of self-reflect, if it even goes that deep. And at worst, there's
or
just some songs that are, that would be probably the better way to put it. And then other songs, at worst, are going to be kind of outright heretical, not kind of, but outright heretical.
There are a few, sadly.
So, but then there's, just the beauty of, for me, it was first the beauty of chant. And I know, John, you and I, some of our friends who are seminarians currently are big into chant, and have taught us some things about chant that I didn't know, like just some of the, you know, how to like chant the hours and stuff, and that's a really beautiful thing. But I've been growing lately in my appreciation as well for some more of the, I hate to use the word contemporary because
I know what you mean.
That word, but
because you can go in the wrong
some of the
direction when you
more-
use contemporary. I like the word charismatic in the sense where it's not the emotional Jesus high, like Protestant charismatic, but the more like charismatic is complementary to the magisterium, the hierarchical. So like you have the hierarchy, which is the structure, the bureaucracy in the good sense, right? The governance, as well as the order of things, right? How things should be done, and including how the liturgy should be run. But then the charismatic is like the transcendence, the flexibility of the Holy Spirit, the relational, like actually noticing the person and not just saying, well, we do it this way, I don't care about you. Even if that person doesn't relate or can't encounter Christ at all that way because they're not ready for it, you know, or don't understand it. Or maybe the way it's being done is very, very uncharitable, right? So you need both. And I think that kind of music, like what we experienced at the Eucharistic Congress, like Matt Maher, that was incredible, like what he did. And he was not, and he even made it clear, this is not a concert. He guided us into silence, in adoration. He guided us into the Mass, you know, prepared us for all of that. Like, if you're not doing that, what are you doing? Now, there's nothing wrong with putting on a praise and worship concert and letting people know, hey, we're not doing a prayer service, right? This is intentional, and people need that, you know? Like, I love that we did the monthly Holy Grounds, you know, at St. Rita. That there was spirit there, right? The thing that was missing, though, in the culture back then is that people didn't have the devotion. They didn't have the sacrifice. They didn't have the Mass. They didn't know the faith. And so they had all the spirit, and I think a lot of people got caught up because many of those people, sadly, who even were in the band, aren't even Catholic anymore. They left the church, you know? And that happens sometimes. But I think you can have both. I think there's something to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely, one of the things I appreciate about the Catholic faith is, you know, the breadth of the umbrella, if you will, that, you know, you can have, you know, someone prefers, you know, this kind of music, and then there's this kind of spirituality, right? The variety in that there is Catholic spirituality in Catholic music, I think it's really beautiful, you know.
Without having to become a heretic.
Because, like, right, yeah, you, like, without, because obviously, like, heresy is, you know, never acceptable. So I'm not talking about that, but
right.
Like, there's this, you know, there's, you have guys like Matt Maher. I don't really listen to him much, but I definitely appreciate him.
He's just the most well known in that genre.
But like, you know, someone I mean, two artists I like a lot, contemporary Catholic artists that are really nothing alike. Okay, I'm a fan of Brother Isaiah, CFR. You're familiar with him?
I don't know if I've heard him before.
He's just, you find him on under the name of Brother Isaiah.
Yeah,
but like, really good stuff. And then I love the Hillbilly Thomists. I don't know if you guys know the Hillbilly Thomists. Yeah,
I've heard of that. Brian Kane has told me about them. They're
Brian
pretty
likes
good.
them too. But you know, they're a bunch of Dominican friars. You know, and they just make bluegrass music, and they just released another album. It's really good stuff. I'm big into bluegrass music, but like, you know, it's awesome. Like, and they're very different.
Yeah.
In their style. So that's there's so much we could go down the whole music.
Yeah, to me, like, I think of the music that I grew up with, and this is so funny to me. Like, as a kid, you know, usually, like, you're getting into all kinds of music that your friends like, and, you know, you listen to this, that. Well, I didn't have a phone. That was before phones. Yes, I'm old in that sense, but yet I'm actually happy that I didn't have a phone as a kid, because poor kids today, you know, in that sense. But the music that I was exposed to, I just never, I don't know, I didn't connect with whatever my friends were talking about, probably because I didn't have access to any of it, right? But I had all the independent Catholic recording artists Dad was promoting on WLCR on the show, and so Kaylee Rain was the big one. That was my favorite, and they actually came to Bellarmine
A couple times.
a couple different times. One of the youth ministers brought him, and so I got to experience the most. I got to experience what a concert was like on the smallest level that you could experience at that time, because I never went to any big concerts or anything like that. So I didn't have a lot of musical, like in the secular world, exposure to that, other than the 60s and 70s on the oldies station, right?
I do have to tell a story on John, though.
Oh, gosh.
Those are my favorite.
No.
We were on a...
This is
we were
awesome.
On a southwestern trip, visiting family out in Arizona. And I was doing the show on LCR. I did it for 10 years.
Oh, no.
Matter of fact,
Not
you
this
can-
story.
You can,
Oh, gosh.
if you go to WLCR.com/music, the page should still be there. It's a bunch of the shows are still up there in a kind of a lossy format. but
I didn't know
they're
that.
still
That's
there.
cool.
But when I would travel, if there were places that we were going to be, that some of the artists that I played were there, I would go interview them. And most of it was just I would maybe pick up a recording or two from them. But we were in Phoenix and stopped in to see Aaron Thompson, who's a very talented. He's a church musician basically, but he put out 2 or 3 different albums, and he was very gracious, and they were absolute terrors.
I was 12,
They were
13.
they
I
were
was not
driving-
having a good day.
They're driving their mother crazy.
Oh, gosh.
And Aaron just stepped in and did a great job, kind of settling them down, and took a couple pictures.
Oh,
But,
man.
yeah, there's a lot of really very talented Catholic artists out there, and I just noticed we got a.
No, you're good. You're good. So I think of the music as like a clear expression of like what amateur radio is, and all the desire to share the faith, and what you've done in my life, Dad. Like growing up, like one of my favorite things was baseball. And I think like everything you taught me about my faith like came from you providing the atmosphere, the environment, right, for me to grow up Catholic. Helped me like take my faith more seriously. But it grew up not in this overly pious way that felt like imposed, forced, or abnormal. But I felt healthy. I felt happy. I felt normal. And it was through that I eventually felt holy. Like I felt like we had a very beautiful, holy Catholic family, but in a way that was normal and acceptable and common, right? And ordinary. And I think that's all like important because, and I even said this when I shared a little bit about my story at the beginning of Spirit Inspired a couple of years ago. I played baseball. I was in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. I did piano lessons. I mean, we did normal things. It was like daily stuff, but we didn't do too many extracurriculars. You weren't driving yourself ragged all over town for us like some parents do today. And on some level, that's like living through their child. But this was like one of the greatest gifts that I ever had to play baseball. Because you loved it and you got us playing, and when I was 7, 8 years old, and it just felt like an environment where you could learn the skills of what you need to learn in the spiritual life and the social life, of how to treat people and how to respect God and work hard and be patient and endure difficulties and all that, but you did it on the baseball field, and so there was a connection. Even if at the time I couldn't have made the connection immediately, I do remember a book you bought for me for Christmas called Crossing Home: The Spiritual Lessons of Baseball. And when I got it, I didn't read the thing. I didn't even understand what it was. I was like, oh, a book that mixes baseball and religion. Cool, But it was like when I had to give up baseball, when I got cut from Western Kentucky's team, I picked that book up. It was still on my shelf, and I read that thing, and I was overwhelmed because of what you did for me and my brother, you know. And it was always surrounded by the Chicago Cubs and the St. Louis Cardinals, you know. That was always our two teams, and they were rivals. But something changed, you know, after getting away from baseball for a few years. The year Grandma passed away, when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series, it was like a fulfillment of all those years.
On your brother's birthday.
On my brother's birthday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they even won one of the games at Wrigley on my birthday. So it was like all wrapped up in that experience. And there was just something really special about that time. But my favorite time happened years ago at Okolona Little League, about when we were playing on the Cardinals that year, when I was 16, and we went. What was the record again?
17-1.
17-1. You were the manager, which was the only year that you ever got to be the full manager of the team. And we went almost undefeated. And you took us to Texas Roadhouse to celebrate, because you promised if we went undefeated, you'd do that and buy us all steak dinner. And the only game we lost, I can't even remember the full situation.
It was 2-1.
It was 2-1. We barely lost, and it was a coaching error that you decided to take credit for, and so you took us out anyway. And to me, that was like one of the greatest memories I ever had as a
That's
kid.
a great team. We outscored our competition 189-11.
I love that you remember that. That's so incredible.
When you have a team that good, you don't forget it.
That's very true. That's very true.
They were a very talented group of kids and all easy to work with.
Yeah.
But one of my philosophies is, and like I've told him many times, so when you love something, you want to see it to continue. You train your replacement. That's the same thing with amateur radio. I've taught hundreds of people amateur radio. Some have embraced it and enjoy it, and some have said, well, that's nice, and move on to other things. Baseball's the same way. I've coached hundreds of kids over the years. Every once in a while, I get a phone call out of the blue. Hey, coach, and I go, "What do you need?" You know.
Right. And umpiring. You know?
Well, I opted to do some umpiring as well, so I've done that about a dozen years.
Yeah, every time I step on the baseball field, one of the umpires says, "Hey, how's your dad?" Like that even happened yesterday. It was awesome.
But in the Catholic faith is the same way. You have to pass it on. You have to train your replacement, because you won't be here forever, and if you take everything you've learned with you. And that's one thing that I regret being a Vatican II child, is that and Vatican II had to happen because a lot of stuff that Catholics did, probably from the 40s through the 60s, was not because they understood why they did it. It's because Sister said, or because Father said. We do it because they said so.
Yeah, they'd lost their faith. They didn't know it anyway.
Right.
It's sad.
You didn't know what was going on. So the problem was with Vatican II was they just kind of threw everything out instead of saying, okay, we need to teach the faith. What I'm seeing now, especially with our newer priests that are coming in, is that they are on fire for teaching the faith the way it's supposed to be taught. And they're not afraid to stand up there in the pulpit and shake the leaves, shake the trees a little bit and see what falls out. Because there's a lot of people out there that think they're good Catholics that are sorely mistaken. And the one thing that irritates me more than anything is a choir that doesn't know their place. They don't know what their purpose is. And they may be a beautiful choir, but they don't know why they're there. They go in and they play 6 minutes for a 30-second recessional, and I could go on and on because that's just one of my pet peeves. The other pet peeve is people walk into church and they don't know why they genuflect. I always like it on Good Friday when the tabernacle's empty. You walk in and I ask people, I say, why are you genuflecting? Well, we just do. I said, no. The tabernacle's empty. There's no reason to genuflect.
Right.
Today.
Although at the same time,
Some people do it out of habit by accident, even if they do know.
I was gonna say sometimes I genuflect in the movie theater.
I can see that.
That is awesome.
But again, that gets back to, you don't do things because this is what you do. You do things because you understand why you do them.
Yeah.
Right.
But if no one's ever taught you why we do things this way. And we've had a couple really good priests here in the last couple of years that they stop Mass and they explain, this is why we do this. This is why the priests do this and the laity don't. And those teaching moments are very important, because there's a lot of very poorly catechized people that are now 2 generations deep, and they taught their kids what they knew and they didn't know enough to really teach them. And I was one of those, because my mom, she did her best. She was a teacher in the Catholic school system, but she didn't have the resources that were necessary to really do the job well. And when Tina and I got married, I wasn't as well versed as hopefully I have gotten now. And I still don't. I'm not a Latin guy. I know a couple. I know Memento Mori and Tempus Fugit, and that's about it.
Yeah, but you still read the Catechism of the Catholic Church cover to cover before it was cool.
Well, I did.
There's that.
And that was another thing. My mother asked me, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because I want to know what's in it." Well, you've heard of what's in it. I said, "Yeah, but I've never actually read it." And the great thing was that you read this, and it says, "This is what we do, and this is why we do it," and the biblical reference as to what backs that up. Mm-hmm. And if you spend a little time in that book, it's second to the Bible. That those two go hand in hand. That you read the Bible and you read that, and you go back to the Bible, and that's why the church teaches this. This is why it's so important that the church teaches this, and why it's important that the man standing on the altar teaches his flock, even if it means stopping Mass and saying, "Hey, we don't do this. This is reserved for the laity. This is reserved for the priest. This is why we do it this way." There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And if a priest is worried about ticking somebody off in his parish, I'm sorry, grow a pair.
I love that. I think it's so important that people hear this in a raw, blunt way, because how many times are we afraid to be blunt and real and raw and vulnerable? Like you gotta say it like it is sometimes, so that people can be jarred and shocked and hear it, so that they can receive it maybe differently than they expected to, but in a way that actually helps them recognize the legitimate problems that we have faced for many decades. Just like Archbishop Kurtz said a few weeks ago when we interviewed him, there's a difference between complaining and lamenting. You complain, it goes nowhere, you're just angry all the time and you don't help anyone. But when you lament, you're addressing legitimate problems, legitimate issues. Not being taught the faith is a legitimate issue, but lamenting, trusting that God will provide. And look what he's done with the flourishing of vocations with these men and these young priests, right? And what is happening in the church today. Like when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was quoting Psalm 22, right? It was a prayer of lament. And by the end of that psalm, it's praising God. He never felt like he was abandoned. He was addressing a legitimate problem, a pain, but he was guiding people, even in that moment, to trust in the love of the Father. And I say this because I didn't know what to ask my dad on this episode today. I was basically, "Hey guys, I need some help." And Patrick just sent a quote that I want to read here right before the episode. And I just thought it was so like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed. And he simply said this from Matthew chapter 6, verse 8. Matthew, of course. Thanks, Matt. He's not even here and he's helping. No, St. Matthew, of course. It says, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask him." And that's what I think I needed this time, because many of the episodes we've had have been thanking various people in our lives that have, got us to this point in our life, like you bringing your father on. We had Mr. Miller, our 8th grade teacher on, which was awesome.
He was great with ham radio too, because...
Oh, that's right.
There's a missionary down in, I don't remember away for, South America somewhere. Not Brazil, but down that way somewhere. And he's a ham, OA4SS. Man, he's a big contester as well. So, and we touched on contesting, but that's they're entirely different topic.
That's a totally different episode.
Yeah. But he would get on the air with our kids once or twice a year. And then Mr. Miller would come in and they would talk to each other in Spanish, and the kids are like, "Wow, this is really cool." So
That's so cool.
But the way I introduced, and this just take a half a second.
Yeah.
The way I introduced amateur radio in the classroom, and why I think for any teachers that might be listening that this is a good avenue to go down. If you are in a STEM school, or if you need to teach geography, if you need to teach confidence, if you need to teach how to communicate with people, how to start a conversation, how to end a conversation, amateur radio is the way to do it. I started my class by setting a radio on the table and turning it on with no antenna on it. And I said, we got to do something here. And then I showed the kids that we have 12-inch squares on the floor. Okay, this antenna that we're going to make, this is the formula for figuring out how long this antenna is. So I introduced math. I've introduced electronics. Now I've introduced carpentry and measuring stuff because I've got these 12-inch squares. I use the 12-inch squares on the floor as a ruler to measure out the antenna. And then we put it together. I taught them how to solder. And this is all in a 30-minute period.
And you can teach creativity when you make an antenna out of an aluminum baseball bat.
Right.
You know.
Then we threw it out the window, and we climbed up on the porch and hung one side of it and stretched the other over to a point and hung it up, and then one plugged in. And then we plugged it back in. And then they started hearing things and hearing people. And I got hold of a ham up in Michigan and a ham in northern Ohio and a ham up in Pennsylvania. And all the kids took turns talking on this antenna they just built, all in a 1-hour session. And so in that 1-hour session, they learned everything from geography to electronics to how to solder, how to build something, and how stuff works, and how to talk to someone they don't even know.
Mm.
And it opens so many doors and so many opportunities. And I've seen so many success stories. Like our vice president of our radio club, she's 16 years old. She's been licensed for 3 years. And
Yeah, she's awesome.
I kind of talked her into being the vice president. Which,
Well, of course, but this is training your replacement, Dad. You have to do that.
Exactly
it's the only way. And you never know who's going to hear this, even in a few months after we post the episode, and they might be inspired, and they might be a Catholic school teacher or principal here in Louisville, and you might get a phone call. Or they started on their own because they don't know how to reach out. But there's ways to connect amateur radio and obviously the faith on a deeper level. I think we've talked about so many things. And as I was saying earlier about just thanking people, like we had thanked Archbishop Kurtz for his years of service and so many others. I have to thank you, Dad. Like, I wouldn't be where I am without you. Like, you're my father, and you have successfully broken a lot of generational chains and pains from the past, and you have 2 sons and daughters who love you dearly, and I cannot thank you enough for everything you are.
Just keep kicking out grandkids.
That's okay. We have one coming up soon.
I wish we could have had them first.
That's all right. It's all right. Oh, thank you, Dad. This is awesome. And thank you, Vincent, for being here, as always.
Pleasure.
Dad, you got any final thoughts from everything we've chatted about?
Oh, yeah. If anybody wants to look me up, it's ky4ky.com. And that's an amateur radio call sign, and it's our website. It's a great introduction to amateur radio. Baseball is a lesson in life, because every part is in movement, and it all has a part. Some people think baseball is boring, but it's a thinking man's game. Everybody has a part to play. Everybody has a role to play. Some seem to be more important than others, but none are. They're all equally important, because at the critical time, anybody could be called on to do something that has to be done, and if it's not done right, the plan fails. It's the same thing. Tomorrow's a holy day of obligation, so I don't know when this is going to air. So tomorrow, from what we're doing,
we're filming this on the Feast of St. Maximilian Kolbe, kind of intentionally, since he was an amateur radio operator. So it's always the day before the Feast of the Assumption on August 15th. So,
but don't be afraid to pick up a book and learn something different. Don't be afraid to take a chance. When I went into air traffic control, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just went. And don't be afraid to look at something you've never thought about doing, and do it, because there's a big world out there, and you might be surprised how good you are at something you've never tried. And like when John started playing baseball, he threw equally poorly both hands. He was terrible at 7 years old. But by the end of that year, he'd made the All-Star team. And matter of fact, the guy I was coaching with asked me why I had nominated John for All-Stars. And he said, he's not, I don't think he's good enough. He said, well, look at this kid and this kid. He's better than him. I said, well, you're probably right. He said, well, he should be on the team. So he ends up on the team and ends up being the star.
But the fact that my dad, who was the coach, didn't let his own son on the All-Star team initially says something about not playing favorites and being confident in wanting to really teach me how to play well and not just favoriting me. And that to me has been one of the best lessons in my life.
Honestly, I think coaches, if a guy's going to coach right, he's always harder on his own kids than everybody else. And I had a parent ask me one time why the coach's kids always end up being the stars of the team. No, they're not always, but quite often they're the better players. I said it's because they get all the extra coaching that the other parents don't give their kids. They have all the equipment home. They get to talk baseball on the way home. Their dad rips them up one side and down the other for not doing this and not doing that. And do this better. If you do this, it's going to be a better result. So they get the more hands-on. Where a lot of parents use sports as babysitting, so they can go do whatever. I go to games and I see the parents not even watching their kids play. They're sitting there doing stuff on their phone.
Yeah.
And it's not a babysitting service. It's a way to teach life. It's
also not a way to live through your children either.
Right. Guys I played with when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, we still talk, and we talk baseball about the good old, quote unquote, good old days, because they were good old days. My dad was our coach till I was 12, and he'd call me. He was a policeman. He'd call me. He says, "Hey, I'll be getting off late. Grab the bag and meet me over at the park." Well, we just lived had to walk up the street under the overpass to get to the ballpark. But here I am, 11 years old, and I'm carrying 2 bags full of gear, bats, and that was my workout.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do any workout, any extra weight workouts. It was there.
Well, I'm thankful for having to do that myself, carrying gear all those years, and just the time that we had, because time is so valuable, and
A lot to be said about it. I was very fortunate when I was able to retire because I could actually coach you guys through high school. That was a blessing that I would have never seen coming, and it was. And even now, some of the coaches of the high school teams around the area are kids that I had the pleasure of working with as players when they were in high school.
Yeah.
And it's fun when I walk on their field as an umpire and I just look at them and say, "Okay, get this over with now. You're out of here."
Well, now the next step is you getting on that alumni baseball game at DeSales High School coming up that they better be having this fall, because that'll be a great gift to have together. So, love you, Dad.
Love you too.
Thank you. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for being on, watching another episode of Spirit Inspire. Again, like and subscribe. This is a great opportunity to propagate the gospel, as we've talked about, and force the algorithms of social media, who doesn't even seem to care about the gospel, to share the gospel without them fully understanding it. And continue to pray for us. We'll pray for you all. And we'll see you on another episode next time on Spirit Inspire. God bless.